Good evening. I call to order the Village of Westmont regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for July 10th, 2024. We have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
Commissioner Peterson's here. Commissioner Berry.
Here.
Commissioner Lavoy.
Here.
Commissioner Zakiri.
Present.
Chairperson Carmichael.
Present. Okay, we have a quorum. Would everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And while you're standing, anyone and everyone who testifies tonight has to be sworn in. So please swear that any and all testimony you give will be the complete truth. Thank you. A reminder for everybody to silence your all your electronic devices. And another reminder that anyone who testifies has to sign in with their name and a point of contact, either here at the podium or out in the hallway. The next item is approval of the minutes of our June 12th, 2024 regular meeting. Would I have a motion to approve?
So moved, Barry.
Second, Thomas.
Motion and second. Discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Peterson votes yes. Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Lavoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Zakiri.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
And Chairperson Carmichael.
Yes. And again, before we get underway, review our public hearing procedures. First, we introduce the applicant, and then he or she comes to the podium, presents their case. After that, our village staff weighs in with guidance and background on the issue. And then anyone from the public is allowed to come forward after that and make comments and questions to the commission. Finally, the commissioners will discuss the issue, and hopefully then we get to the point where we can have a vote. We'll close the public hearing and vote on the issue. A reminder that this commission is a recommendation body only, that the village board has the final say-so in our agenda items. And I see under old business, we have nothing to cover in this meeting. Under new business, first is public hearing PZC 0102024, a request from Dwayne Newton, who's the petitioner, and Kenneth W. Newton as trustee of the Kenneth W. Newton Declaration of Trust, the owner, for the property at 10 West Troby Avenue here in Westmont for the following. A zoning ordinance map amendment request to rezone the property from OR1 Office Research 1 District to R3 Single Family Detached Residence District. And who would address the commission? Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. As stated, my name is Dwayne Newton, petitioner, representing my father, the owner, Kenneth Newton. I'm here for a zoning request from this OR1 district to a residential district. Prior history, the property was zoned a residential. Back 88, 89, it was rezoned to this OR1. I was away for a while. I'm kind of contemplating coming back, and I'd like to do some upgrades and changes to the property. And with this OR1 district, I'm kind of strangled. So that's the basis for my request.
All right, thank you. Village staff comments?
Yes, before I begin, I want to make sure one of our commissioners plans on recusing themselves tonight, so I want to make sure they're noted on the record.
Yeah, Commissioner Peterson will be recusing herself from this project.
Okay, so we still have a quorum?
Correct.
It's not, okay.
So, Dwayne gave a little bit of the history on the property, or Mr. Noonan gave a little bit of the history on the property. First, I want to talk about where the property is located, because that's part of the reason it was rezoned. So the property is located just west of the Village Police Department and the Fire Department Station on Traube. To the south is the Public Library as well. And then to the west is single-family residential. Historically, this property has had 2 dwelling units in it within our construction records that we have. So back in 1988, the village established the OR1 district, the Office Research 1 district. The goal of that district was to have a zoning district that would allow for largely professional and administrative offices along some of the major streets, and to have somewhat of a buffer between our commercial corridor in Ogden and the residential properties along Cass Avenue. So jumping to 1990, the village initiated a rezoning of to establish the OR1 district along that north corridor of Cass, right south of Ogden, as well as portions of north of Ogden as well, to facilitate some development that did not occur there between those commercial corridors from Naperville Avenue to Ogden. The rezoning included a number of properties such as the police department, fire department, the library, and a number of R4 residential district properties, including 10 West Traube. However, the property did not develop in accordance with what the zoning district was proposing. It remained a residential property. The residential use and the structure on the property as it currently exists is considered a non-conforming use and structure due to the OR1 district not allowing residential dwellings and the type of construction on the property. This means, as Mr. Newton noted, that the owner is pretty restricted in what they can do on the property because of this zoning district. Basically, the owner is restricted to doing normal repairs, some enlargements, and some other improvements to the structure, and that is all under the non-conforming use clauses within our code. Additionally, when you try to appraise a property that is not conforming, it can be difficult, and it lowers some of the property value as well. So going to what the petitioner is requesting specifically, they're requesting a rezoning of the property from OR1 to R3 single-family detached residential. The petitioner also noted in the project narrative that they would convert the property to a single-family detached residency, which is a permitted use in the R3 district. If the R3 rezoning is approved, they would be under those bulk regulations. So if he came back in for a permit for anything, any improvements, they'd be restricted to the R3 bulk standards and the residential standards. When we consider requests like this, as we've noted in the past, we're looking really at 2 items at the staff level before we move forward with the petitioner. One is that we check the comprehensive plan to make sure the land use, the proposed land use plan is in accordance with the request. In this case, the single-family residential request, or R3 rezoning request, is in line with the comprehensive plan as it's marked as a single-family detached residency land use. Additionally, we look at the surrounding zoning for the properties. As I noted prior, to the west is R3, which is single-family residential, so it does not create any spot zoning issues in this case. And so overall, so it doesn't create the spot zoning issues as the neighboring properties are zoned R3. And that is all I have regarding this specific case. So I'm open to any questions from the commission as well.
Okay, thank you. And is there anyone from the public who would like to come forward and address the commission on this? Seeing none, let's go to the commissioners. Commissioner Barry, why don't you start?
Thank you. Just to review, because I thought I didn't catch a part of it, right?
You're fine.
As I look at that lot, you say that's the only one there that is OR one that from going west there, those go to R?
So, correct. So R3, if you look at the properties to the west, adjacent to the west, along Traube, those are zoned R3.
Okay,
and
so
then-
just to confirm, it's not I know they don't like, you guys don't like any spot zoning, so this would just be a continuation, not him isolated in the OR?
Correct, yes.
Okay, well then, I really side with the resident that, you know, I don't know what kind of office research is gonna go into a small lot like that. He wants to improve the community. I think we've seen him here before in other issues where he spoke out and been a part of the community. I can't see something wrong with it. So I like it moving forward, and if it makes his property, you know, worth more, and, you know, it's a horrible situation if he can't even get it appraised or, you know, refinanced or anything if, in the situation he's at, and it's something from 1990, the year I graduated high school, you know, that hasn't developed, I would definitely be in favor of this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a baby.
You don't get me started.
Commissioner Lavoy.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the applicant in this process. The only question that I have is really either for Sean or for staff, and that is the non-conforming setback. Is that something that could cause the applicant's problems later, or does it make sense to grant variations for the setbacks as part?
So I'll touch on it. So there'd be a non-conforming side yard setback when you move to the R3 district, which is when a lot of these properties were annexed in, a lot of them have that setback as you go west. Additionally, the front yard setback is not conforming to the R3 standards of 35-foot setback that's required. However, it's somewhat in line with the neighboring property setbacks. We do have some clause in the residential code that allow for in certain cases, if the adjacent property owner or property, it goes up to, I think it's 25 feet, they can match that. I don't have access to the plaster area for the neighboring property, so I can't confirm that off the top of my head, so.
I guess where I'm going is if the applicant wants to make an improvement to the property, and it's, the setbacks are non-conforming, could he go up to where it exists now, or would he be restricted to where?
He would have to do a jog. You can increase a non-conforming structure, you just increase the size of it. You just can't increase the existing non-conformity. So if it's a side yard setback, let's say the property's at 5 feet from the side yard setback and the requirement's 6 feet, you'd have to have a little jog in the property to 6 feet, and then it could go back as long as it complies with all the other setback requirements.
Opposed to granting him variation, if he had a variation for the 5 foot, he can go 5 feet all the way, right?
Generally, yes, but that's not part of his request at this time.
Okay, well,
You'd have to
I
have
just,
plans showing that.
Correct, yeah, we'd have to see basically what improvements he's trying to do, and if it would be in line with the setback or not, and then he could come forward with
I'm
variation.
trying to make it clean for the future, you know, if he has another application that comes in or wants to do something with the property, that non-conformity, I don't want it to be a hindrance, that's all. I'm supportive of the application, and I have no other questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Zakiri, what say you?
No questions, I'm supportive.
Commissioner Thomas?
No questions either. I support it.
And so, staff, I have a question. Has this house been used as a residence all this time since it was rezoned OR1?
As far as our records go, yes.
It sure seems like a reasonable request to me. Any further discussion with the commissioners? If not, Chair would entertain a motion to approve this zoning ordinance map amendment request to rezone the property from OR1 to R3, single-family detached.
I'll do the motion to
There
approve.
we go. Motion, Lavoy.
Second, Barry.
Second, Barry. And again, no further discussion. Public hearing is closed. Have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Zakiri.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson is recused, and Chairperson Carmichael.
Yes. Well, there you have it, Mr. Newton. The staff will contact you regarding being scheduled to address the village board. Certainly. Good night. Next item is open forum. Is there anyone here who would care to address the commission on any issue that was not on tonight's agenda? Ladies? Oh, we're looking forward to you coming up and... Okay. Then, our public agenda items are finished, but we're going to continue the meeting like we did last month. The discussion item tonight is on the continuation of this zoning ordinance update. And where'd it go? Tonight's, as you know, is bicycle parking. So Scott, would you lead us into this?
Yes, I can. As the commissioner noted, or the chair noted, we are discussing the zoning ordinance update. We'll be taking discussion items likely until we go into the public hearing to get input from the commission regarding those very specific items. Largely, they're going to consist of new instances in the zoning code, so stuff that the village really hasn't dealt with before. So tonight, we have bike parking on the agenda for discussion. So when we started talking with our consultant, staff requested that we look at bike parking, as we've seen other municipalities in the surrounding area that have recently updated their zoning ordinance. They've included bike parking standards and regulations and requirements. And the consultant indicated that it's something that we should look at as well, and provided some draft documents with that. So as the Village of Westmont, we've never dealt with bike parking in our zoning ordinance, so it's a completely new topic. That's why we're coming to you as the commission to see what the input is on your end. When we look at regulations, it's a very broad term, so it's kind of a spectrum of what we want to do. We have a lot of liberty at this level, and then ultimately the village board at the public hearing portion on what those regulations can be. This is the time for us to go back to our consultant, tell them what this commission wants to be implemented in that code. It could range from requirements, it could range from just guidelines, it could range to something in the middle. So I do have our new planner, Adam, that will discuss some of the things that were in your memo that were provided to you. He's going to give just a brief presentation on some of the surrounding communities and just some general guidelines on bike parking. And then we'll come back. I have specific questions for the commission, and then we can discuss it all together.
Okay. Mr. Walsh, good evening.
Hello, Commissioners. So yeah, as Scott mentioned, today's discussion topic is going to be bike parking. And before we dive into the requirements, I just want to refresh you all on the benefits of biking so you have that in your mind as we continue through this discussion. For one, it's an active form of transportation that does improve the physical and mental health of those who do it. It does not contribute to pollution, and it can also reduce the number of cars on the road, which could reduce vehicular traffic, demand for vehicle parking, and even reduce the pollution caused by vehicles. So it does have quite a few impacts. And if you also look at Exhibit A, that was the bike map that was included with your staff report. That was created in 2020. It was not adopted by the village, but it was just created back then. And it does show the many bike trails and routes from the region and that even are just local that are in this community. And it also shows that Oak Brook, Clarendon Hills, and Downers Grove each have their own that go right past it. So Westmont is easily accessible by those in other communities to come hop on a bike and then come down and visit all of our businesses. And so with those benefits and the existing trails in mind, we asked our consultant to create some guidelines for bike parking, which we are going to review a couple of them. So there should be a handout in front of you that has two tables on them. This is an amended version of the two tables that were in the staff report. It shows a more accurate interpretation of the code of Downers Grove and Clarendon Hills. And there are just a couple things that I wanted to highlight that are pretty important on how these guidelines are created. So Westmont's proposed requirements, they're based on the square footage of the building, where Downers Grove and Clarendon Hills, they base them on a percentage or ratio of the required vehicle parking. However, really all three requirements are based on the building square footage. Just Downers Grove and Clarendon Hills, they do it indirectly through the vehicle parking. So in Clarendon Hills, for example, if you change the square footage of the building, that changes the amount of vehicle parking required, which would then change the amount of bike parking required. But what our consultant has proposed for us in Westmont, both the vehicle and the bicycle parking are both dictated by the square footage of the building. Also, the requirements listed in Table 1, that shows what is most frequently used as a requirement for these uses. So for example, commercial services requires 0.33 spaces per 1,000 square feet with a minimum of 2. However, in the zoning ordinance update and even in the other communities, more specialized uses like a health fitness service might require 0.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, while a financial service might only require 0.1. So just for the sake of discussion and for the examples tonight, I just chose what was most frequently used for commercial service, retail sales, and office. But do keep in mind that they do vary based on the actual use. And last thing I wanted to note is that all three communities have a minimum provision of 2 spaces for non-residential uses. So as we now move on to Table 2, that's going to be something that you want to keep in the back of your mind as we look through what's actually required. So I want to start with multifamily residential requirements. Our consultant has proposed for Westmont that if there are 5 dwelling units or more, then 1 space per 4 dwelling units is required. For the sake of example, we're going to consider a hypothetical building that has 20 dwelling units in there. So in Westmont, that 1 per 4 dwelling unit requirement would come out to 5 bicycle spaces required. In Clarendon Hills, they require 1 space per 10 dwelling units, which comes out to 2 bicycle spaces. And then in Downers Grove, it gets a little tricky, so bear with me on this one. They require that if there are 10 or more vehicle spaces, then 1 space per 10% of vehicle spaces, or 2, whichever is greater, is then required. So it's a little jumbled, but how that results in 4 bicycle spaces is that they require 2 parking spaces for vehicles per dwelling unit. And in our hypothetical 20-unit building, that would come out to a vehicle parking requirement of 40 spaces. So then we would take 10% of that, which is the 4 bicycle spaces, and obviously that's greater than 2, so they would have to provide 4. Moving on, I'm going to talk about commercial service and retail sales for just Westmont. These now are going to be 2,000 square foot units, again, just for the sake of example. For these types of land uses, generally they require about 0.33 spaces per 1,000 square feet with a minimum of 2. So for a 2,000 square foot building, that requirement would come out to 0.67 bicycle spaces required. How our code reads is if it's over 0.5, you would have to go up to 1 space required, but as the consultant is proposing a minimum of 2, then you would have to provide 2 for a 2,000 square foot commercial service or retail sales space. And then going on to office is the same story. They require less at 0.05 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So a 2,000 square foot office would have to provide 0.1 space for bicycles, which technically with their code, that would be rounded down to 0. But because of the minimum 2 provision, then they have to provide 2 bicycle spaces for a 2,000 square foot office. And that's the same story for Clarendon Hills and Downers Grove. When you go through and calculate the square footage of the building, the required vehicle parking, and then take the ratio or percentage to find the required bicycle parking, they both come out to less than 2. But because they also have that minimum 2 provision, a 2,000 square foot office, retail sales, or commercial service in Clarendon Hills or Downers Grove still has to provide a minimum of 2 bicycle spaces. So I know that was a lot of math. Does anyone have any questions for me about how the square footage was calculated or how these bike requirements came out to? All right, hearing none, that means I did a good job. That's all I have for my introduction, so I'll turn it over to Scott, and he'll take you through the rest of the discussion, and I'm available for any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Adam touched on a lot there, very specific regulations and things like that. He did a lot of research for the surrounding communities. He has a whole spreadsheet put together and everything like that. So we can go more in depth on some of those items, but generally, I first want to say that the zoning ordinance is limited to the private development side. So when if we go the route of requiring anything, it'd be required likely on just on the private development side. So that does not include what the villages and public works plan is for those public bike parking racks, as we see on, they just installed some on Quincy and things like that. It does not include that. This is separate from it. Additionally, we're also not talking about bike routes, as that's not the purview of this commission. A lot of the bike routes are done through the county level, with some local ones in between. So the first question that we would like to be answered is probably the most basic one, and we can go into some more specifics, but it's, does this commission feel that we should require it or not? If we don't require it, should we have it instituted in some way within the zoning ordinance? I'm going to give some pros and cons to it. So some just general pros to requiring it is that you're going to have more bikers on the road. You're going to have more or less traffic related to vehicles. However, it could place an undue burden on the developer whose use may not require bike parking.
So you're saying that putting more bicycle racks around is going to increase the number of bicycles?
Correct. You'll likely see a correlation of more people biking if there's more places to store biking.
Do you have any data to support that contention that?
Likely CMAP does.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
So those are some of the pros. However, as I said, developers, it could be an undue burden on them when they're developing a project and they think their use doesn't need it, or they don't think that people living in that building will use them. However, you could also look at it at promoting biking in general within the village. So I'm opening it up to everybody to discuss if we want to require them or not, and then I have some other items to get to after we decide that.
Would a developer just be able to come for a variance or a waiver in the case of them saying, hey, my use doesn't require, just so that there's an option for them? I know that just means something else that comes before this commission, which might be ticky-tack, but.
Correct, yeah.
But they do have that option.
They would have everybody would still have the option to request a variance if it's a requirement. Unlike our parking stall standards we have currently, those are waiver requests. It would still be a variance request to the number of bike parking.
And bike parking, just to be clear, that's just like bike racks outside,
yeah.
right?
It can be bike racks, it could be storage lockers of some kind as well.
Right, for a big multifamily unit.
Yeah.
There's usually some regulations that go along with that. So it's got to be on a hard surface. Has
Correct,
to be a
yep.
bike rack that's secure and where a bike can be locked to it. And related to your question about the variance, I don't know if there's going to be a process for administrative variances and whether certain classifications of use can request an administrative waiver, so they wouldn't have to go through the, potentially 2-3 month delay.
Yeah, right.
For that issue.
So if we go the route of requiring, one of my suggestions would be to provide the zoning administrator with the opportunity to waive the requirement if they fall into some category like it would just be dangerous to have people biking on that route and we don't want to encourage that, or if they determine that an industrial use doesn't really need bike racks or something like that. So that would be a suggestion.
Who would determine we don't need bike racks because it's a busy road? I mean, the majority of our roads are busy.
Correct. Yeah. So my first thought is if there's no sidewalk present, there's no safe way to get to the property. For example, we have a lot of sidewalk on Ogden that is kind of broken up. There's no safe route on Ogden to bike currently. So,
But people do it. I
yeah,
mean,
people do it. Yep.
And Jill, you said, I think, who would make that determination?
Yeah, who
It would
would-
be the community development director would be
Okay.
vested with the authority to grant administrative variances. And that whole process would be set out in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So a little deeper discussion than what tonight's about.
Yes, yeah.
Well-
Do they send the same enforcement for the no bicycle riding and skateboard riding downtown? Because I've never seen anybody, get in any trouble for those things on the sidewalks. But is that the same enforcement that would take care of that, or?
It's the enforcement where if the ordinance requires bicycle parking and they have a site plan showing the bicycle parking and then they take it away, there's a requirement that, things shown on the site plan, improvements, landscaping have to be continually kept in place, maintained, whatever. Yes, there could be enforcement if suddenly the bike rack's gone.
My recommendation on this would be whatever staff thinks is best, so we can move on and get into more important things and move forward. And I appreciate you letting us know the benefits of bicycle riding, but, I think we all got that, and I think we should just move forward. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it.
Well, Harold, I would say, I think that Scott brought up that we should have a discussion, if nothing else. Should this be mandated, or should it be recommended? How heavy should we recommend that the
Well, again, my
the zoning-
opinion is, I go with whatever staff wants. I would, support whatever their decision is, whether they want to mandate any, none, Downers Groves, your own. I support whatever you guys would take the lead in.
I do think this is important, sorry, Harold, but I mean, I used to be an avid bike rider, not too much anymore because I'm old, but I have had issues with Westmont not having bike racks for probably the last 20 or 30 years. Part of that is the village itself, like downtown and other areas, but I personally like this topic, and I think it should be mandated. That's my opinion. Because it's not going to hurt anything, and it's going to encourage bike riding, and being around the neighborhoods all the time, I see people riding their bikes everywhere, on every street imaginable, and I'm not sure. I do think that if you put bike racks, more people will ride their bikes, but I mean, you can't say, oh, they're on Ogden Avenue, it's too dangerous to ride, they don't have to do it. I don't, but that's my opinion. I think this is important, and I'm in favor of mandating it.
Adam, would you come to the podium again? You gave us Clarendon Hills and Downers. You looked at other communities as well, more than just those two, is that correct?
Yeah, I looked at many communities, trying to keep it limited to DuPage County and those that were along the.
I'm curious
BNSF
what
line.
percentage was this adopted or even recommended as a requirement or mandated versus a recommendation?
Yeah, there were quite a few. I definitely say it was over half that have some. It varies in some, like Elmhurst, I looked at as well, just to have some more ideas of what other communities do. And theirs are only for certain districts. I believe they only do it in their central business district. So
As a recommendation or as a?
as a requirement.
As a requirement.
Most places that I saw that had anything in their zoning ordinance, it was a requirement. There was not a lot of just like a recommendation in there.
Naperville has it, for example, for virtually all uses except for most residential uses. Multifamily has to provide it, and it's a percentage of the required off-street parking spaces, like 5% or 10%, with a minimum of 3 bike parking spaces or 5 spaces, depending on the use, and it is a requirement.
Does this vary with, it could be interior, inside a building, or outside? Like in a-
Correct, yeah. We've seen it where it's between long-term storage and then just short-term, which are the bike racks. For example, when Quincy Station came here, they provided indoor parking for bikes because they felt their residents were going to use them. Likely because of proximity to downtown and the train station.
You also see the e-bikes everywhere now.
Yes.
I think I saw 2 or 3 today in Westmont alone.
Yeah.
And those need a place to park, and if they don't have a place, I'm not sure where they put them.
I'll also say it also relieve some of the stress on Public Works for putting them in the public right of way if private properties for their uses are providing them in some way.
I think it's the way of the future, and it's good that we're discussing it and that it'll be put in the zoning code. So 10 years from now, when more people are riding bikes, if more people are riding bikes, it won't be like, oh, we should have put this in there. I think now's the good time to do it. That's just my opinion.
Craig, you've been silent.
I have been.
Yes, that's been our observation.
I think we should have the racks available, because if people are riding bikes, they have to put them somewhere. And they just can't put them on the street or on the sidewalk where they can get in the way. There has to be some kind of provision for them. Now, what that provision is, that's to be determined, but they should, the racks should be there, should be available, in my opinion.
I think the one thing that jumps out on your chart, Adam, is under the multifamily residential, 20 units and more. It seems that our suggestion, our proposal here is quite a bit more denser or a higher requirement than Clarendon Hills and Downers Grove, particularly Clarendon Hills, with five versus 2 and 4. And that's because of the way they calculate on the number of spaces versus the square footage. Is that how we?
Yeah, it's mostly based on the actual rate of the percentage. I did check with a couple other villages as well, like I looked at Downers Grove and Woodridge and Naperville, and they really come out to within 1 or 2 spaces of one another. I even tested it at some higher rates, even like at 10,000 square feet, and it still comes out to being within about 2 to 4 spaces from each other when you go to the higher rate. So I'd say that what's proposed for Westmont is around like the median of neighboring communities. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's too low or that it's too high.
Thank you. Chris, I think you have some more to add here in it.
Oh, boy. Well, the intent and the spirit of what we have here on this table is imposing the requirement to a developer. And I've done a lot of development, ground zero type development. I've done a lot of stuff in Downers Grove, Homewood, Elmhurst. I do a lot of multi-use apartment buildings in the ground zero environments. You don't have to tell a developer to provide a bicycle space because they do it anyway. Right at the end of their parking space, there's a space for either storage and their bike or their bikes or whatever they have in the space required already. You don't have to tell them to do it. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, Craig, in the spirit of your comment, I think it's an issue that what we have seen is the lack of bike racks in our community in general, right? That we should have them downtown. We should have the ability to come in downtown. That's not a developer. That's not what this table's for. So I'm not in favor of adding more regulation onto a very complex development strategy to do these things, even though a bike rack is not a big deal. And typically, bike racks can come in all shapes and sizes, either the pipe that's in the ground or a rack itself. They can cause problems too with snow removal. They can cause problems with deterioration and rusting and that kind of thing. It's something that has to be maintained. And it's something that I'm not in favor of over-regulation. I think that people, if they're riding bikes, if the village should make more availability for bike racks in our downtown area, but I don't think it's good that we require by everyone, and I don't think it should be related to the parking and all either, because the other thing I'll mention too is that we're seasonal. No one's gonna ride their bike in the winter. They just don't. Now, some people have to ride it back and forth to work, but it's very limited. And it's really to go, I see like some people going back and forth to work on a bike, once in a while. But if it's raining out, it's not gonna be nobody's gonna be riding their bike downtown or going anywhere. Even on recreational use, no one's gonna be going anywhere. So I'm not a fan of adding regulation, another layer of requirement, when this spirit of this document is specifically for developers, and they're going to do it anyway because they want to rent their building. In order to rent their building, they want to provide a storage unit and a bike park for everyone inside the building, and they do it. They did it here, they did it there, they did it everywhere. Everyone that I've worked on has had bike parking inside the building, either a lower deck level or whatever it is.
Well, then why not just require it to make sure we get it? You know, if they're gonna do it anyways, why not just make sure we get it?
One more piece of tape that
I mean,
developers have to.
if they're gonna
you
do
know,
it anyways, there's no
Be
tape.
discouraged about, when you hear that about Westmont.
But if
they're
they're
so-
planning to do it anyways, what's to get discouraged about?
Well, you just hear that on the street, that, hey, I can build this in this town for this because Westmont's so restrictive. So anytime we add
But
another
it's a bike
layer.
rack. I mean, if they're gonna do it anyways, to your point, why not make sure we're gonna get the bike rack?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the design, okay? Like, if you're doing ground zero stuff, and it's a smaller development that doesn't have a parking garage, and it's relying on parking outside, okay, and if you have to put it on the sidewalk, when your building line is on the sidewalk in downtown areas, where are you gonna put the bike parking?
They can ask for a waiver then. Those are edge use cases, that's not every,
Well,
I'd say those are probably more unique circumstances than general.
Yeah.
That is one thing that I heard, like, several commissioners, they mentioned, like, oh, we need these racks, we need these racks. This doesn't say anything about the village adding any
No, this
racks
is
or anything
private
downtown.
requirement.
This is for
development
developers.
and redevelopment.
So, like, when I kept hearing that, I'm like, well, this isn't gonna all of a sudden
Or
put bike racks everywhere
shopping
downtown.
malls,
And if
strip malls.
hopefully, one of the things that we are gonna look at is the CBD parking, where we should go to zero requirement, well, then there would be zero requirement on bike racks, right? So, it's one of those things that, again, I'm backing whatever you guys recommend, just to make it streamline and go forward. But I just think that maybe we just want to be clear that this doesn't mean that the village is gonna start putting bike racks all around town.
Oh,
This
but
is
it means
not
we can
change
get more
that.
over time as buildings get developed, at least
again,
it's an
just-
option to get more. If the village isn't gonna put them in, then
Just to clarify on
Yeah.
what this does. This does not include any funding for bike racks or
Yeah,
anything like
I
that. So just to be
understand that.
very clear on what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah,
Is
it's-
another.
it is very clear.
So, again, I back the staff on whatever your recommendations are for here for Westmont.
So just to reiterate, as Commissioner Berry noted, obviously, the Public Works implement the bike racks in the public right-of-ways and maintain those. This is specifically for the private side. So it sounds like we have some mixed feelings on it. I do hear more likely to require it from this commission than not require it, based on what I heard. To a point from Lavoie, I think, and Barry regarding where we would require it. You noted that like the CBD B1 district is what I'm going to call it for now. We don't have requirements for parking anymore in the downtown for private development. So unless it's over a certain square footage and everything. That is something we would need to look at as well with bike parking. If we want to require it all in the downtown, these properties are very limited because of just the size of them and their frontage to Cass Avenue. It can be difficult. I mean, we saw when the bakery came through, they had very limited area to work with in the back. So the requirement, if we're not requiring vehicle parking, do we need to require bike parking at all? I understand we don't, for some commissioners, we don't require it at all, but if we do require it, we do want to set standards for what districts we require it in. So in the downtown, as I said, it can be difficult to develop those properties.
It'd be next to impossible to do it in the downtown.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any access to the rear. You know, there's only one catwalk, two if you count, you know, KC Hall, and there's two catwalks. And then the alleys are for deliveries, so you can't bank on that there's not gonna be a beer truck or whatever. And then where would the room be? I mean, you'd have to put them in the brick areas of the sidewalk. I think the Uptown has one in front, and I think there's some others, you know, but I think for parades and everything else, that I don't know how we would do it unless we take maybe some of that parking area that we have, you know, our designated parking, and create like a bike area, you know, which may be something on Lincoln Street that we would consider. You know, we have that new parking lot there. Maybe there's a bike parking designated there where, you know, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know this is just for private development, but my thoughts have been on that Lincoln parking lot as well. The village could install a rack, and then over time, they could get an idea of how often it's, and how much it's used.
Also the park district. Because where do you ride your bike to? The park. Right? Ty Warner, whatever, I mean.
Yeah, and I'd say,
All kinds of parks around town that don't have them.
if we made it a requirement, you could require the park district to do that if they implemented a new park. I mean, we just saw a new park come through,
Yeah.
right? 2 new parks. So,
I think maybe the park district could see a need and fill the need. I know the racquetball club has bike racks, and they keep their eye on those things.
and we know, for
Without
example, the park district
being
has
told.
2 different types of parks. They have those neighborhood parks versus their program parks, like Veterans Park and stuff like that, where you see more kids going to baseball and stuff like that.
In my observation, I think they do have a lot of bike
They do,
racks. I
yeah.
mean, it seems like they have, I don't even know how the new ones work. They're kind of those used, so I don't know if you get 3 bikes in or 2 or what, but it seems like they have a lot of those
Yeah.
U-type bike racks. You know.
Now, jumping to other districts, for example, what we're at least recommending, I think, at the staff level is we base it on use rather than the district itself, other than having some clauses, for example, the B1, because a lot of those properties, it wouldn't make sense for them if they redeveloped unless it was a very large project, like a Quincy Station, to require it. We are of the impression that we would base it on the use as the other municipalities do, and not based on the district. So
That makes sense to me.
I just want to make, just so we're clear. So since we're talking about requirements in general, one of the things we've been, I'm not going to say struggling with, but trying to get a good understanding of is, at what point do we trigger the requirement for new parking and new bike parking? So currently in our code, whenever a new use, other than the multi-tenant spaces, when a new use moves into a space, I'm going to use our last one, which was Urban Tri-Gear from last year. When they moved into their new building, they had to come in for, it was a parking variance for their vehicle parking because they didn't have enough parking for their use. The reason they had to do that is because we looked at their use. We have to look at our table, and that specific use required a certain number of vehicle parking. So the requirement was because we looked at a new use. Now, we could only require it if it's a whole new redevelopment, such as a Advocate that we did before, or last time we were here. Advocate, which is a very large project, whole new site plan, it's consolidation, and that's the other end of the spectrum. New development requires new parking, new site plan, and everything like that. Or do we just look at the use, new use moving in, and if we determine that needs bike parking because of our requirements, they're required to put it in, even though they're just a new use moving into the building. So there's a spectrum there. Do we require it on the new use? Do we require it upon redevelopment of a certain square footage of the property or building increased? Or do we only require it on brand-new developments? Any thoughts?
I know Naperville says if you increase the building or off-street parking by 10% or less, there's no requirement to install the bike parking. If it's more than 10%, you've got to install it for the entire project, assuming there's none there already, or you have to increase it to beyond what you have based on the square footage.
Make every resident do it. Everyone's got to have one in front of their house, that's it.
Yeah, I should note, because we are talking about it, we are not looking at adding it for any single family, obviously.
Be a
Or,
non-conforming if that happens.
yeah. It'd be likely only limited to multifamily, if anything in the residential, related to dwellings, just so we're clear. We don't want to implement it that far.
Okay, well, I hope this has
You
been
kind of bring up a good
helpful.
point, when we talk about our other application that just came in. What happens if they come in and we have another applicant that comes in right next to them that's for elderly medical equipment? Something for seniors that aren't going to be riding their bikes. You make one do it and then say, well, because your use, we're not going to make you do it.
Correct.
I kind of agree that it shouldn't be triggered by a new use that comes in. It should be triggered by development or expansion of an existing building.
Yeah, I only mention it because our current code, and the reason that Urban Tri-Gear had to come here is because there's new use moving into the building, and for vehicle parking, they had to get it. I think at the staff level, we agree, we don't want to make it a requirement for new use in particular. We would want to limit it to some type of expansion or complete redevelopment.
Chris brings up a fantastic point that I don't think we want to overlook, that this is not going to apply. I mean, this is going to be really far-fetched for some businesses. If you're a physical therapy that has, the nursing, I mean, there could be a lot of things where this really does not have a fit. So, to last month's meeting, this is why I don't like any new rules, because they get complicated, and then really, what are we doing? Because now, who's going to enforce these when it, other than new stuff that comes in?
There's also other complexities too, Harold, like
Right, yeah, but
with ADA requirements and that kind of thing, where now all of a sudden you have a bike rack on a sidewalk, and now it somehow impedes the ADA traffic and requirements there. So you end up having these bike racks that, are placed somewhere just because I have to place them there.
Yeah, I think, so the way our consultant's looking at this is we would have, much like we do with parking stalls and parking lots, we'd have guidelines that they have to abide by. So distance requirements and things like that. So it wouldn't be, they can place it at the back corner because we're requiring it and they don't want anybody to use it type of thing. We'd have specific guidelines of where they need it placed. Doesn't impede pedestrian flow of traffic is one of them.
I don't know. The reason why I feel the way I feel is because I design stuff for a living, and it's hard. It's hard to meet all the requirements, and adding more requirements, even though this is simple and everybody thinks it's simple, it's not.
And then
It's not.
who checks on these down the road to make sure they're maintained and not rusting and becoming a nuisance? Because, we've seen that with our landscape stuff. Once it's through there, it's never checked on again. So the more Chris has talked and the more I've listened, I take back what I said, that I back staff. I'm against adding any ordinances to this because it's just too multi-layered. It makes it more difficult for any potential developer, to just add one more layer to it. So I appreciate what you guys are doing here, but I think, you really bring up some good points about the nursing homes, we have hearing impaired, we have blind services here. There's all kinds of different things that if all of a sudden they put up a big building, that they're gonna have that requirement where they might need the parking instead, or they might need more, handicap access vehicles instead. but yet we have, then they'd have to either go for a variance, which again is just another hoop for a developer to have to pay for and pay his lawyer and his everything else.
Not only that, but I'm telling you that all the design work that I do, they build it in anyway, because they're accustomed doing their design based on who they're selling to. If they're selling to young people, transient people that are going to the train, yeah, they're gonna want a bike space. They do it without you telling them to do it. They do it because they want to market it that way. They do it because their customer needs it. And I just think that's the way it should stay.
I'm not disagreeing with anybody, I just want to make that clear. This is something the consultant brought to us.
You get blamed as staff.
I know. The consultant brought it to us, that's why it's here tonight.
I get it.
Because we want to know, we got the documents, we're like, oh, we're doing requirements is what they're looking at. We want to be able, if that's the route we want to go, where we don't want to require it, we need to tell them before it goes to a public hearing phase.
Is the new community center over by the church gonna have bike parking?
They already have it.
Because of the school.
Are they gonna add additional with that new building?
They're not.
Why would they?
They already have it.
They already had it.
Well,
But they would have had to, even though they already have it, because it would have been required. So there's an instance right there where they already have multiple bike racks for the school, and then they would have to add more because it's required.
Yeah.
There's an example right there where it would have been an.
But if they were required and they already had it, what's the problem?
Yeah, right. That's the other. Well, they're next
New
door.
building didn't have
You know
it,
what I mean?
so-
It's a new development.
Yeah, the building would have required it, I think, that if we do a new building like that.
So I think that comes back to the question I posed before. So if we do require it, we have to look at, in that case, is that considered a big enough improvement to the property that we should require bike parking of some kind? Or do we only do it for brand-new developments? I would consider that some type of expansion of a property because of that, how that is situated. We could just not require it for expansion at all. We could require it if it's X amount of square feet bigger, because potentially you'd have more people that can occupy the building, so potentially you could have more occupants that are bike riding. It could be done like that. That's how some of the current parking standards for vehicle parking are outlined in our current code.
Hey, Scott, can't we make it like is strongly recommended?
We
That
can,
you provide bike parking?
We
if
can.
applicable to your particular use and site development? And do it a broad stroke like that and leave it at that?
so when we go through like our pre-application phases, which
Yeah.
you've gone through before, you get comments from staff. A lot of the times that's as far as we can go because we have no requirements to make them do anything. It would just be a recommendation from staff that, oh, you should probably add bike parking. It looks like you're on a bike route of some kind. It looks like you're going to be attracting people that are bike riding. It seemed feasible that you should do that. They can say no, and then we don't get any bike racks or anything like that for their bike riders. But also the developer doesn't have to do anything on their end as well. So I don't know if anybody else has any discussion on, at least if we do require it, do we want to limit it to just new developments or a certain square footage? Or it sounds like no new uses. That seems too extreme for this commission, based on what I heard.
I'm not for new uses. I think that it might put a strain on somebody who's just looking to do a new use from to a nail salon or something like that. I mean, although that's probably a good use of having a bike space. But, maybe they just don't have the money for it to add it from that regard. But yeah, I'm for requiring it for new. I do like the idea of having the community development director being the one to, grant a waiver for certain items and just looking at it rather than come here.
Okay.
It's just my take.
Well,
I'm for requiring it.
For requiring it. I have one other option I wanted to talk about. One thing I haven't seen a lot of it in zoning ordinances, but it is an option. One of them is, in lieu of requiring anything, we could make it a ratio of some kind. So if you provide X amount of parking spaces, you can reduce your vehicle parking requirement by 1 or 2 spaces because you're providing bike parking.
I don't like
That is an
I'm not in favor
option.
of that either.
No, because how would you would just be losing a parking space. You wouldn't be guaranteeing they'd be using the
Correct.
bike rack.
Yeah,
You'd just be
I don't
losing a
like
parking
that.
space.
that's fine. I'm just
As an
giving
op-
ideas.
As an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because parking's always at a premium.
That, I would say that would benefit a developer.
Yeah, wouldn't that make it easier on developers?
It would benefit a developer who maybe their site can't accommodate it and they don't want to come in to get more approvals for variance of some kind. And that might be a route they could go by providing the bike parking. Hopefully when we're doing the zoning ordinance, you're right, we won't see nearly as many parking variances, because we're looking at that as well.
As we remember from Quincy Street,
Exactly.
The trend today is less cars, more Uber, more bicycles, more e-bikes. That's the trend today. What will the trend be 20 or 30 years from now? We don't know that. We can predict, but we don't know that. We assume more e-cars and transportation, but who knows? Maybe fried food will be recycled then. We just don't know those things. But the trend is today, less parking. So it's not as great a demand where we were looking for 2.5 spaces before. I think we ended up with under 2 at
believe so,
Quincy,
yeah.
right? I mean,
1.4.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's come a long way, but that may change the other way in 20 years. We just don't know that, so.
Also, if you do that, what's gonna happen is, developers are pretty smart. What I would do if I were a developer, if you did that to me and there's a reduced percentage of parking spaces required, I would have my room that I would normally dedicate to storage in the building, and I would put a bike rack in there. Oh, now I can reduce my parking by 3 spaces, it's gonna cost me X amount less to do the building. That's what they would do.
That seems like a good thing.
They're gonna find a way to,
Well, you could probably put a cap on it. I mean, you can't just put, 100 bike spaces and,
and no parking spaces.
yeah, right.
So when we've seen it instituted, it's usually at a cap of some kind.
Right, exactly.
Usually it's like 10% at most or something like that.
And also, if I can interject on that point, when I was looking at the neighboring communities for the requirements, a lot of them have a maximum before they even start talking about reducing like a certain amount of parking spaces. I believe in Clarendon Hills, they might have a max of 50, and that was the highest I've seen. So that would possibly translate to 5 spots for cars that are reduced, where other places I've seen are like 20, 25, even as low as 10 bike spaces are max. So they might have a minimum of 3 or 2 they have to require, but if they do the calculations based on whatever the requirements are and they have to require 25, if they have that maximum of 10, then they just have to do 10. They don't have to do the full 25. So they wouldn't be able to greatly reduce how many vehicle spaces they have to provide.
Okay, and well, I do have another question, but thank you for your comment. If a developer comes in and they put a bike rack in their green space, would that be considered part of the landscape?
So the first part again, sorry, the what space?
The developer comes in.
Green space, okay.
Would that be part of their green space?
They would still have to meet the landscape standards. Likely, we would require some hard surface under it, based on what the consultant gave. Usually you don't want that, unless it's like mulch or something, you don't want it on the green space because of how it's anchored into the ground.
Well, you
My
can actually
understanding
make it
is.
still make it
So
green.
am I to understand that currently, do we have a bike rack code as if
Nothing. Nope.
if I wanted to build, if the park district was building a bike rack, they don't have to have a certain amount of cement, they don't have to have, they can put it in the dirt, they can do whatever they want?
Unattached to the building requirements, building codes, zoning doesn't have any regulations related to bike parking. So at the bare minimum, we would be instituting at least some regulations regarding that, at the bare minimum, if
It would be
we
a
don't want to require them.
this would only be a part of it. There would also have to be the requirements then
Correct.
of what would be in the bike rack. And maybe that would help too with, it seems like a lot of the commissioners have made their mind, but because if that requirement becomes very expensive, what does that do for the developer too? You know, if all of a sudden, hey, they got to put, you know, trees around it and, you know, 4-inch concrete and everything, all of a sudden or is it attached to the building? You know, I've seen these where they're just circles where you can, you know, pull the tire into them. I mean, there's all kinds of options, I assume, on that, you know.
Yeah, we'd likely look at, similar to what we're doing with some of the lighting standards in the new code, we'd provide options. You're gonna see a lot of, I'm gonna call them infographics of some kind, showing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, to help developers and contractors, once they know, they can see it visually and try not to use as much lingo of any kind. So they'd have at least some idea of what is permitted and what's not in that case.
So we'd have a lot more staff time in this on, as far as getting those ordinances in line and so forth.
I'd say for, I don't know what you mean by staff time specifically, but I'd say if a code is implemented correctly and well, it would reduce staff time by
We have to
reducing the number of
create that code,
cases.
though, right?
Say that one more time?
We'd have to create that code.
The code would be created based on the consultant in this case, not by staff. We would just be providing the information to the consultant. I don't think I got great answers tonight, so I'm gonna do a straw poll based on requirements, because I can see some of our commissioners are getting antsy. So first, I want just a straw poll of who thinks it should be required. I'm cognizant we are missing one commissioner tonight as well. So if we can just do a straw poll, if you think it should be required, go ahead. If you want it as a requirement, bike parking is a requirement on all new developments, please raise your hand. 2? Do we have another straw poll? Do we want to provide the option for developers to do a switch out of parking spaces versus bike racks? So X amount of bike racks would equal 1 parking space. We have 3 for that. Are we in agreement, if we do require it, we do not want to require it in the B1 district at all? The current B1 district? Raise your hand if yes.
Saying the CBD or?
CBD, yes.
Yeah.
If it should or shouldn't.
We should not require it in the CBD.
But where would a place be big enough that would it,
I'm just straw poll, that's all I'm looking for. We can look at specific properties. If they accumulate enough properties in succession, that's when a new development would come in and require it. If we do require it, it sounds like we're not gonna try to require it at all. But I need to know if we would require it in the central business district at all, if we do require it.
I wouldn't require it.
I would point out that if there is a large multifamily project that's processed as a planned unit development, the village could always impose that requirement as part of the PUD
Correct.
in the downtown.
Correct.
Good.
Staff is still gonna look at doing guidelines at least and regulations for requirements of where there should be placed setbacks, that type of thing, if developers are looking to do it. It sounds like, based on this commission, we are not gonna be requiring bike parking based on the discussion, in general. We can discuss further at other meetings, in the public hearing portion particularly. But from I'm gathering, we don't want requirements. We only want some type of guideline for the developers. Okay?
Yeah, for me.
I will move it to the chair.
Okay.
Next item.
I hope that was helpful, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It was painful here. Next item, on the next month, or I'm sorry, September.
Analyze stuff, we're gonna analyze it, right?
September
That's what you're here
25th.
You gonna go down that hole?
We're here to experience this pain. That's what our job. September 25th through 27th is the American Planning Association conference. and it's downstate in Champaign. But commissioners are welcome to go and coordinate with staff.
Yeah.
You'll get some support, from the village. And I think generally the Friday is the day that they do commissioner training.
I went back and checked. It's actually on a Thursday this year. It's on September 26th is the commissioner training. It's a full day of training. Village has funds for registration, depending on how many commissioners want to go. It is in Champaign, Urbana, at U of I. I have not been to one at U of I, but I've been to a few before. I know some commissioners have also been there, to the recent one in Naperville, and they've benefited from it. We also, if some commissioners are looking at the agenda for the APA conference, first, you can contact me or Jamie Hoffman if you do want that agenda, so you can look it over. We can probably have some funds for registration for other courses that are there as well, especially if stuff is very applicable. I think a year or two ago, they had buy to rent right before we had a very large project that was buy to rent. So there's stuff that's specific. They might even have stuff on bike parking. So if you do want to do those other cases, please let me or Jamie Hoffman know. You have both our emails. If you want to do just the commissioner training, please let us know ahead of time. We have an early bird rate. So if you do plan on doing that, I think we get a little bit of a discount.
I know last year, Jamie sent out an email.
Yeah.
Be helpful, so you'd get a yes or no right away.
Yeah, if the commission feels I can have Jamie send out an email to everybody that has the agenda, and then if you respond back that you do want to go, we can set that up. You do have to register. You either have to provide Jamie with a bunch of information, or you have to come in and type it out yourself. So just a heads up. But please let me know ahead of time if you do plan on attending.
Okay. Taste of Westmont starts tomorrow through Sunday, so we'd like to see good weather and a lot of participation. Our next meeting will be the second Wednesday of August, that's on the 14th at 6 p.m.
I'll note I currently do not have any cases for the August meeting. I have been directed to continue discussions for the planning and zoning ordinance update.
I believe there's a possibility of some training.
Yes, the other item that we will probably do at that time, I have not gotten confirmation from HR, is in regards to active shooter training. That would be done as a closed session in the conference room, this conference room, for training of that, because it's around that time that we need to do that training. But I'm coordinating with HR, so I will let you know in advance.
Okay. Any commissioners have anything else they'd like to add?
Just one comment. Last meeting, I believe it was last meeting, we had the approval for the park downtown. The construction, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed, is going on. And what a wonderful addition to looking forward. I think they're going to have it pretty close to done. They're probably working on it right now, but really a nice thing that came through here and we're seeing, and hopefully we get to enjoy this weekend. So I just wanted to thank staff and everyone that put that forth to us. Thanks.
Great.
Also, we're going vertical on Holy Trinity next week, so you'll see steel being erected there.
Got a lot of deliveries there this week.
Yeah. All ready to go.
Okay, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Barry.
Second, Zakiri.
Second, Zakiri. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? This meeting is adjourned.